12 students. Here is grade 12 history, unit 3, part 2. And I want to remind you, as usual, to subscribe, like, and share my presentation or my video. That's very helpful as well if you like to download the notes. And before that, let me remind you just these points. Emperor Johannes IV was designated, Emperor Johannes compared to Theodorus followed a flexible approach plus federal approach. And regarding that, the first thing what he did was just granting or confirmation of Menelik's power as hereditary ruler of Shewa as of the Liche Agreement the two sides signed in 1878. As long as Menelik Shah was agreed to pay annual tribute to Johannes and recognized the lordship or emperorship of Johannes, there was no problem at all on Menelik. Only what he did was he dropped his title, King of Kings, to only the title of King of Shah. With regard to Adel Sama, Johannes designated him as Nugus of Gojam and Kafa with the name Takla Haymanot. Okay, so in this regards, Johannes had given recognition to both Nugus Takla Haymanot of Gojam and Kafa as well as King Menelik of Shah to keep up their autonomous status. But what they were expected to do was paying annual tribute and welcoming the emperorship of Johannes. Okay, here it is, the shift of the political center from the north to Shah, that means from Tigray to Shah, or otherwise we can explain it following the days of Johannes, that was from Tigray to Shah, or from Johannes, the power shift to Menelik. Although this point, what it's mainly referring to is, once Johannes lost his life, Nugus Menelik became Ethiopian emperor following the death of Emperor Johannes. As mentioned already, the pioneer of it was Theodorus who founded, pioneer meaning founder, the pioneer of modern Ethiopian empire state formation was Emperor Theodorus. It was clear. So Johannes consolidated it, and finally Menelik succeeded in creating one modern Ethiopian empire state, because Menelik had the opportunity to learn, to get lessons of the experience, the failures, and the success of his predecessors, Theodorus and Johannes. During the reign of Emperor Menelik II, the size of the old Christian kingdom grew by more than double, very clear, thanks to the remarkable victory the Ethiopians scored over the Italian force at Adwa in 1896. Following that, Ethiopia had been recognized by foreign powers as autonomous, as sovereign nation, okay, keeping up its modern boundaries. What were the major features of the reign of Emperor Menelik II? One, large-scale territorial expansion. He was able to expand his territorial possession in the direction of the south, southwest, and southeastern. Just for you to, on the sketch map, to make it clear for you. Okay. Here is southwestern. This is eastern part of Ethiopia. This is south of Ethiopia, south. This is north. This is west. So in between these two, southwest, this refers to Ogaden. Southwest, Kafa, okay, the Oromo Gibe states within southwest, and south like Borona. That's it. Sidamo, including those. Secondly, the other main feature of his reign was defending the country against colonial aggression by mobilizing the entire Ethiopian population. This refers to his defending ability with his army, with his people against Ethiopia, against the Italian aggressors. Third main feature include the process of modernization in Ethiopia that was begun by Emperor Theodros. Yeah, Menelik did good, the best of his energy in creating or bringing about modernization, including novelties, technological novelties from outside Ethiopia. We'll see that. Okay, free territorial expansion and the incorporation of kingdoms. People's reaction to the policy of centralization. Territorial expansions by the kings of the Central Christian Island Kingdom were common even in the medieval period. For instance, here King Amdezion is mentioned that he had embarked on a major territorial, the most expansionist king. We have learned this in grade 11. So, Menelik's process of territorial expansion could be classified into three phases. The first phase, was the time that covered from 1875 to 1889. Menelik, before he became Ethiopian emperor, only as king of Shewa, subdued and incorporated the regions of Shewa Oromo, the nearby Oromo, nearby his palace, meaning from Ankober, the surrounding Shewa Oromos, were peacefully submitted to the army, to the empire state, or incorporated peacefully to the empire state. The other is Christian Guragi or Kistane, Ilubabor. It is very helpful for you if I could show you on map. Here is the Shewa Oromo. Here is the Shewa Oromo, okay? Whilst Gurage nearby, the Kistane, Sodo Gurage, because the Gurage Kistane were in fear of the attack from behind, from the Oromo neighbors. Ilubabor, here it is. Wallagga is here. The Gibe states are here, meaning Jimma, Limuinaria, Gomma, Gumma, Gera are included within the Gibe states. Arisi is here, and Harar. These two were areas of bloody wars who had stiffly resisted the army of Menelik, but in the end he made them part of his empire. Okay, these are the three factors why the Gurage, the Kistane people, the Sodo Gurage, wanted to peacefully submit to the army of Menelik. One was the reason that they felt that they were co-religionists with Menelik's force, co-religionist Christians. Second, geographical proximity that the Kistani, the Sodo Gurage, had to northern Shewa. And thirdly, owing to their traditional protracted wars with the neighboring Oromos. they were in fear of that, so they chose to join, to be incorporated to the empire of Menelik peacefully. Those which bitterly resisted his army include Muslim Gurage nearby. Okay, here are Muslim Gurage, the Silti, who came. RC, as I said, I encircled it here, and Harar. Menelik faced fierce resistance from the Silti, organized by or under Hassan and Jamo, and influenced by the Mahdists and Muslim exile. The Mahdists in western part of Ethiopia, you have here the Mahdists, attacking Ethiopia, mainly attacking the possession of Johannes. It had its own reason. This was the reason, partly the influence from the Mahdists, the other Muslim exiles, because Johannes had forcibly converted all Muslims into Christianity in fear of that persecution. His action, instead of even, rather than just submitting or converted to, rather than the conversion to Christianity, they preferred to exile to the Sudan and join to Matama, especially to Matama, and this force might have joined the Mahdi's force. Because of this influence, Hassan and Jamo organized a stiff resistance against the army of Emperor Johannes, but finally Ras Gobana subdued this region, the Silti region, that was in 1888. The other is RC Oromo. After 4 years of bloody clash, the RC Oromo were defeated by the army of Ras Dargi at the Battle of Azuli. That was in 1886. Ras Dargi was the army commander of Emperor Menelik. Harar was also subdued following the defeat of its last ruler, Emir Abdullahi, by the army of Ras Mokonnen, army commander of Menelik, at the Battle of Chelengo. That was 1887. The regions beyond the Gibe were a bone of contention meaning a center for a conflict or war between two parties, two groups that had a kind of common interest towards that territory. Like Nugus Taklaimanot had been given by Emperor Johannes, what we call Kaffa, and Menelik needed that area, Kaffa area, the most fertile and resourceful region. So the army of Menelik and Nugus Taklaimanot confronted there at the Battle of Mbawo. That was in 1882 in Wallaga, and finally Ras Gobana defeated the Judge Daraso. The Judge Daraso was army commander of the Taklaimanot, governor of Menelik. After Abba Jifar's second, of Jimba, Jote Tulu of Lake Kalam and Kumsa Morada of Lake Nakamte, these two were of Wallaga states, were among those who peacefully submitted with their local autonomy respected. The first, meaning that Abba Jifar, 1882, Jote Tulu, 1883, and Kumsa Morada, 1884. It says respectively. Between his first phase of expansion, territorial expansion, and the second one, there had been one situation or disaster facing Menelik, that was the Great Famine 1889 to 92. It was otherwise called by the local Ethiopian people, Kufukan, was the cattle epidemic, a diseased cattle coming from India, otherwise called render pest, imported from India, which affected the northern and central regions of Ethiopia. This epidemic, what it says here is causing deaths of many cattle and people, and it also damaged as well as disrupted production and trade. Besides the population movement from the north to south, Menelik, resettled these people, dislocating these people from Tigray and Rollo, and settled them in central Ethiopia, much of them in southern part of Ethiopia. Then followed was second phase. This marked with the coronation to power of Emperor Menelik in 1889 until the Battle of Adwa. Following his emperorship, Menelik incorporated Walaita, Bale, and Sidamo. These are, here is Walaita, Walaita, here is Sidamo, and here is Bale. These three became part of his empire, but there was a conquest, what's called the conquest of Walaita, because there was a resistance from Kaotona. There was a bloodiest war of all other resistant fighting against Menelik's army. The bloodiest was the fight between Walaita and the army of Menelik. Its resistance collapsed when Kaotona, its last ruler or king, was defeated by the combined army of Ras Mikael. Governor of Olo, Fitavrari Gabayo, army commander of Menelik, Likamakwas Habate, the Judge Balcha Safo, Ras Olda Georgis, and Abba Jafar. They contributed their armies. Third phase marked was post Adwa victory, we can say. The third phase, it was following Adwa. Adwa's victory, Menelik's motive was to create a buffer zone, a shield, a protective zone, protecting Ethiopia from adjacent colonial powers like Britain, France, Italy. So he incorporated border Ogaden, as we have, as I have showed here, here is Ogaden, bordering Italian Somaliland. The other is Assosa. Here is Assosa, where Gerd Ethiopian Renaissance Dam built. Here is Walaga, Assosa here, Benishangul around here, Borana, cancel this one. Walaga already came under Menelik's empire. Here is Borana, South Ethiopia, and Kaffa, here is, with its capital city, Bonga. These areas were incorporated, and some of them, like Kaffa, subdued by the army of Menelik. Kaffa's autonomous status ended up in 1897 when its last king, Tato, which means king, Gaki Serrecho, was defeated and captured by the army of Menelik under Ras Wolde Georgis. You have to identify the commander-in-chief of Menelik's army at the same time. Those who gave military support to his army include the Judge Demis of Walaga, Abba Jifar of Jimma, Ras Tasamba of Ilubawar, and the rulers of Kollo and Konta in the south of Ethiopia. In the fight against Kaffa. The army of Menelik under Ras Makona, together with the support force of the Judge Joti of Kalam and Kumsa or Gabriel Zaver of Nakamte, conquered Asosa, Benishangul, and Komosha. Okay, the boundary, the border lowlands, almost under the control of, became part of Menelik's empire state. The reason why he did he planned to create a buffer zone was just prior to his the boundary agreements with adjacent colonial powers like in Kenya under Britain, Somalia under Italians, Djibouti under the French. Here, northern part of Somalia under Britain. Northern part of Somalia was called British Somaliland. This one, Italian Somaliland. The case of Gambella, Benishangul, Walaga area, he had to control these territories in order to sign a boundary agreement with Britain, because the British had already conquered since 1898, conquered Sudan. Okay, the other case of Eritrea or Maramallash, it was under Italians. He had to sign a boundary agreement. So in order from 1902 to 1908, he was so busy in concluding boundary agreements with Italians, with the British here, with the Italians, with the French. He had to do this. So, as a precondition, prior to his boundary agreement, he had to control or give confirmation of his control over the border lowlands. That's it. As we have seen, one of the main features of the reign of Nugus and later Nugusanagis Menelik was the forcible incorporation of vast territories into southern, southwestern, and southeastern territories of present-day Ethiopia. When Menelik was king of Shah, he began to expand his territory. Okay, as king of Shah, it was the beginning of expanding his territory. As king of Shah, okay, he became king of Shah starting from 1865. He became Shah king, 1865. Ethiopian export commodities, okay, such as ivory, gold, civet, coffee, and even slaves were mostly obtained in these areas, notably in southern Ethiopia. It's very clear because even more than southern Ethiopia, southwestern Ethiopia, the most resourceful region in having those items for Ethiopian exportation. Negus Menelik, more than any other monarch before him, appears to have attempted to gain from the natural wealth of southwestern Ethiopia. Not only Menelik, actually, his grandson, Nugus Haile Selassie, used to have items from this territory even. Okay, to have gains, advantage, benefits from the natural wealth of southwestern Ethiopia. Very clear. Robinson put it that way. Menelik desired to gather lands in southwestern Ethiopia and to realize his aim of extending into this fertile region. He worked hard to improve the quantity and quality of his weaponry. You know what it says is having these items, he could just exchange for, he could sell these items, and he could buy modern weapons from foreign merchants, and he tried to have improvement in the quantity and quality of his weaponry. Menelik also wanted to control the long-distance trade in southern and southwestern Ethiopia. We have discussed this. The nature of the north and south's land tenure systems. This, in short, could be said as feudal system in Ethiopia that had scarcely started during the Aksumite Empire, consolidated at the time of the restoration of the Solomonic dynasty by Yukonamlak. So it was not for the first time the feudal society had its foundation. But regarding these things, bear in mind, northern and southern Ethiopia had different land tenure systems, especially after the 9th century, right? The traditional community system of land ownership has continued in the north. Many provinces in Ethiopia's northern regions, including Tigray, Begemder, Gojam, Wallo, Northern Shewa, had communal land ownership that relates with rest, okay? Anyone who could prove a blood connection to the landowner or the original possessor of the land, as well as the creator of the first settlement, had the right to claim the land. Okay, in the sense of what? An inherited land from grandfathers to fathers, then to kids. It goes on in a rest form. As a result, most of the land in northern Ethiopia was based on the rest system. No one could claim this rest from that family, okay? Even the government has no right to do that. Rest is a hereditary right, okay, to hold and use land. The land tenure also included the gold system, which is right to collect tax. At the beginning, gold rights were not hereditary. Okay, a gold right could be called gold system, was a feudal system which could be comparable to the vassalage system. You know, in the vassalage system of Western Europe, the landlords, the landowners passed the land to the lower lord, the higher lord to the lower lord, and the lower lord had to pay tribute to the higher lord. It was that way. This gold system in Ethiopia was a system that was mainly to collect tax or tributes from peasants. At the beginning, gold rights were not hereditary. At the beginning, only rest rights were hereditary, but gold rights not. Gabbar Malkanya system. Gabbar system was the basic means of surplus appropriation of feudal class, the only means to get benefits from the peasants was the Gabbar system. The feudal class used to exploit Ethiopian peasants. It was a basic means of surplus appropriation. Gabbar, in its pre-20th century usage, a Gabbar was a landholding peasant who had to pay gibber to the state. Once the peasant, the Gabbar, took a plot of land from the landowners, okay, he had to pay in return. He had to pay gibber or tribute in the form of like siso, urbo, kuleta to the state. In most cases, it was paid in kind and in the form of unpaid labor service. Okay, it was paid in kind, meaning that no use of cash, no use of money, in kind. Okay, like sack of 2 or 3 quintals of, or sacks of 100 kilograms of teff or something like a barley of his product. He had to pass it to the landowner. And it was paid in the form of unpaid labor service. Okay, there was a labor service in the form of unpaid labor service. This annual tribute or gibur was paid to the gibur collectors, tax collectors. Tribute in kind had different titles based on the purpose for which it was paid, like for land use for the church, payments to the recipients, such as when they received promotions, okay, there was a pay, a tribute, to congratulate local chiefs on important occasions. This also need a tribute in the fasting seasons and at other times. Okay, let me stop here now. For now, we'll continue. I'll join you with the next point. Formation of the Empire State and the administrative system established in the newly incorporated regions, meaning following the territorial expansion of Menelik, made the life of peasants very miserable, okay? Impoverished life, bad or worse conditions of peasants' life became, okay? In the southern regions, peasants were gradually alienated from their land. They were dislocated from their land. That means as a result of the introduction of the land measurement known as qalat. Qalat, okay? Qalat, a land measurement. You don't find qalat system in the north, but in the south of Ethiopia, like Arsi, Bale, Sidamo, Lubabur, a lot, okay, qalat system was there. This action also led to the appropriation of much land by the state. The state owned much land, appropriation meaning controlling much land. It facilitated privatization of land, meaning there was a possibility of selling and buying of land because land became privatized in the sense of like capitalism, okay? In the sense of capitalism within feudalism. It also increased state revenue since it classified land tax based on fertility of rights. Okay, the more the fertile land, the soil had fertile land, the more the peasants or that landowner had to pay a lot, okay, to the government or tax collectors. It pushed poor peasants to status of insecure tenants. Okay, you know, when you classify peasants, those who used to plow the land or till the land, you have on top the farmers, okay? Even among the farmers, there were rich farmers. Below their status, there were peasants. Of the peasants, there were poor peasants. And these poor peasants then became tenants, insecure tenants, no option, no protection, insecure meaning that no protection from anywhere, from the government or from the surrounding administrative body. These tenants did not have any protection to men. Tenants, the word indicates that the landless peasants. Tenants could be said as landless peasants. Peasants were better. Peasants did have their own plots of land, but tenants not. So even we can say tenants were better than slaves, but lower in status, in living status, lower than peasants. In Ethiopian term, we call it serfs, serf. Tenants were serfs, ጭሰኞች. Good land was a land given by the state to government officials. Good owners could be either individuals or institutions, such as churches are institutions, monasteries were institutions. So this land was given by the interest of the state to church possession, monastery possession. The guild owners were known as Malkenyas, and they represented government in their guild areas, the representation. Okay, they were agents of government in their village area. Therefore, they were influential and powerful in their localities. The Malkenyas were guild owners who were respected by the people, fearful and influential, powerful in their village. Okay, changing dynamics of land tenure in the south. What has been changed from the usual land system? Let's see. Menelik's expansion to the south, west, and east brought significant change. Right. On the one hand, it eased, meaning minimize the congestion in the restlands of the north by providing new areas of settlement. Congestion meaning densely populated. Okay, it eased or solved the congestion problem in the restlands of the north by providing new areas of settlement. The north became free of congestion, no problem at all. That means so people were dislocated to other areas of settlement following the conquest of or expansion of Menelik's army. Second, it transposed the Gabbar Malkanya relations to most of the newly incorporated regions. It immersed, okay, there began the Gabbar Malkanya relations to the most of the newly incorporated. What the newly incorporated areas began to exercise the Gabbar Malkanya system. In fact, the peacefully submitted areas to the force of Menelik were free from the burden of the Gabbar Malkanya system and thus managed to retain some degree of. So the conquered and the conquered territories were not treated in a well manner, rather they were treated badly, and they even forced to accept the burden of the Gabbar Malkanya system, whereas the peacefully submitted areas that didn't resist the army of Menelik to some extent retained their some degree of autonomy, it says, a little bit free of this burden. In the newly incorporated southern territories, peasants were gradually alienated from their land. They were dislocated. Okay, this began with the introduction of the colored system of land measurement. Colored system, a large area of land given to few individual landlords, and that was according to the fertility of soil fertility. It was measured, and that measurement mechanism, we call it colored system. The institutionalization of the colored system not only culminated in the appropriation of much land by the central government, but also facilitated the privatization of land. What is mean? It's not individualized. The colored system became institutionalized, meaning organized. It had a kind of governing administrative body, institutionalized in a more organized way. So not only culminated in the appropriation of much land, culminate to the higher extent, to higher degree, okay, to the maximum that means, in the appropriation of land by the central government, but also it was culminated in general, reached the peak. This institutionalization of colored system reached the peak in the appropriation of much land by the central government, and also facilitated the privatization of land selling. It also increased the state revenue since it classified land tax based on the level of fertility of the land. Okay, we have touched this point. According to the soil fertility, there was an obligation from the landowners to pay much revenue or more revenue, less revenue, like that. The colored system reduced the status of the peasants of the newly incorporated areas from landowning farmers to insecure tenants because there was dislocation, okay? Farmers lost their lands, they were alienated from their land, meaning that they became poor peasants. And those poor peasants converted to or changed to the status of insecure tenants on their own land. They were forced to lose their land. Poor peasants who were unable to purchase land, or those who were driven away from their land, were forced to migrate to urban centers in search of job. Because their land was taken, it was sold to the other land buyer, and they were dislocated, and they had no any means to survive. What option they had? The opportunity was to move to urban centers in search of job, and they became factory workers. 3, 4 external relations challenges and threats. This is the political aspect of Ethiopian history. The external challenge. In order to materialize his dream of modernization, Theodorus sought the technological assistance of the European nations, especially of Britain. You know that Theodorus wrote later to Queen Victoria to get to send him a skilled craftsman. Lack of positive reply from the British government prompted Theodorus to detain the British consul, like Consul Cameroon, and other Europeans, clear. That led to the British military expedition against Theodorus. Okay, we have discussed this earlier. And Theodorus finally committed suicide. The British force stormed and plundered Magdala, the last stronghold of Theodorus. After getting the release of European captives, the British force withdrew from Ethiopia. Why? There was no a political assignment given from the Queen British government to Napier to stay in Ethiopia or colonize Ethiopia. The Battle of Gundet and Gura, 3 fronts of Egyptian attacks, 1875. One front is better for you to just use a sketch map for you to make it easily understand. Okay, around, just as a background history to introduce you, okay, from 1872 to 1875, there were areas controlled by Egyptians earlier, before this confrontation, this three-front attack from the Egyptians against Ethiopia. There were areas, territories controlled earlier, controlled by the Egyptians. One was like the area of Asosa, Benishangul, Tajura under their control between this time. Okay, Zeyla under their control. From 1865 on, Massawa under the Egyptian control. The Italians came in 1885 actually. Okay, from 1865 to 1885, the Egyptians remained there. How did they control Massawa? It had been prior to 1865. Ottoman Turks had controlled this area, Massawa, the port of Massawa, and gave it to the Egyptians in 1865 on lease contracts, agreements. So what I mean is, it was from this area, from this Egyptian military bases, they attacked Ethiopia in three different directions. You see what it says about. Number one, Muhammad Rauf Pasha occupied Harar from Zayla. Here is Zayla. Here is Harar. He successfully occupied, and continued to rule the city of Harar area, until from like 1875 to 1885, for 10 years. But the case of this area, Werner Mozinger, he was the architect of Egyptian aggression. He was the one who designed all these three-front attack against Ethiopia. He was Mozinger. Earlier, he was a French consul at Massawa. He knew everything about the landscape, the culture of northern Ethiopian people. So he was a mercenary, advanced to the central from Tajura. What's called Tajura is here, Djibouti, today Djibouti, but the army was destroyed, and Muzinger himself was killed by the Afar people. He lost his life. The other is from Massawa, Arendrop, Colonel Arendrop. He was a Danish mercenary, okay, army commander, who was employed by Khedive Ismail Pasha of Egypt. He commanded the Egyptian army from the Egyptian base at Massawa, and penetrated into what's called today Eritrea, moved into Maram-Malash region. Today this is called Eritrea, north of Tigray, from Massawa, and soon reached the banks of the Marab River. Here is the Marab River. Okay, to the south of the Marab River, we have Tigray, Ethiopian territory. In July 1872, what it says, Johannes had sent to Ismail a letter in which he defined the country's boundaries in the northern and coastal regions and demanded Egyptian withdrawal. You know, as I have mentioned before, his attack did not start in 1875, rather 72. And Johannes, as a reply to this Egyptian attack, he tried to announce to European powers that Egyptian force should withdraw from these coastal areas. He also sent letters to France, Germany, Russia, Austria, and Britain to make them no Egypt's unlawful invasion of Ethiopia, right? And the intention of Ismail to Islamize and enslave these people, as he claimed. Khedive Ismail Pasha was trying to convince the European powers. Actually, they welcomed his pretext, his reason. They accepted as if he was to bring about civilization for Africans, the Horn of Africa. But his intention was to Islamize and to make Islamize, meaning to make the Christian communities of Ethiopia Muslim and to enslave his people, as he claimed. His people here, Johannes people, that means. So he requested their fair justice by describing his hope that Christian European nation would not tolerate the Muslim unjust attack. Because Johannes was confident, sure about the fact that Europeans were Christians, Johannes was Christian, so there could be a kind of support. He was waiting for, a positive response from Christian Europe because of this religious affiliation, and Europeans would not tolerate the Muslim unjust attack from Egypt. Following his failure to get positive response, here it says, the emperor issued a mobilization order in October 1875, issued meaning that he called his people, the peasants, to follow him, to come to confront the Italians. The battle of the Egyptians. At first, he was about to, he issued a mobilization order to confront the Egyptians at first. Then he defeated, thanks to his army commander, Ras Alula, the Ethiopian army won or defeated the force of Egypt, where Arendrop was killed. The Battle of Gundet, it was the first blow given from Ras Alula, Ethiopian victory over the Egyptians for the first one. However, Khedive again sent well-armed troops under the command of Mohammed Ratzi Pasha and the army general Loring, a mercenary from America. The two commanded the newly organized Egyptian army that was reorganized by Khedive Ismail. They came to continue their attack against Ethiopia, but it was at the Battle of Gura that Ethiopian army under the commander, Ras Alula Banaga, scored the second victory against Egyptians. The fall of Khedive Ismail, that was 1879, and the British occupation of Egypt, 1882, were partly the consequence of those two major battles. Khedive Ismail, after these two battles, Khedive Ismail lost his life, and Egypt fell under the British colonizers since 1882. However, Egypt, as if she won, Ethiopia demanded reparations, meaning that indemnity, war indemnities, we call it, a pay. Just Ethiopia was about to pay. What Egypt demanded was Ethiopia to pay reparations, release of white prisoners. There were whites in the hands of Johannes to release those prisoners, and cession of occupied Ethiopian regions. Some area to be in the hands of Egyptians. They demanded these three things, but Johannes in the end, we will see. None of these terms remained fruitful. Eventually, a period of no peace, no war continued in between 1876, 1884. No peace, no war, meaning there was no sure about the existence of the two. Okay, Johannes was not sure about the prevalence of peace or war. There might be war. In fear of war, there was also peace. So, in short, what it means is no war at all had occurred between this 1876, 1884. Why 76 marked the Battle of Gura, Ethiopian victory. From that time on, there was no any conflict, war between Egyptians and Ethiopians. 1884, the arrival of an envoy, a British envoy, on behalf of the Egyptian government, coming to the court of Emperor Johannes, who was at that time at Adwa. Two events accounted for Egypt to seek a diplomatic alliance with Ethiopia. Two events accounted for Egypt to seek a diplomatic, following these events, two events, Egypt was about to get, she was highly interested to get the support from Ethiopia, a diplomatic alliance. One was its occupation by Britain. Okay, she became under a foreign control, a foreign power control. The other, the rise of the Mahdists, otherwise called Muslim revivalist force, which defeated and drove the Egyptian invading troops out of the Sudan, but with some Egyptian soldiers being encircled in eastern Sudan. Okay, you see, the Egyptians, because of the Mahdist movement, they were to, the Egyptians tried to attack the Sudan. The Mahdists then repulsed them, pushed them back, but there were some soldiers remained in the Sudan. The Egyptian soldiers remained in the Sudan. We'll see how, you see, it was with that precondition to make this, to evacuate this trapped Egyptian force from this area with the help of Johannes. So these two were the very, very basic events that forced the Egyptians to seek a diplomatic contact with Ethiopia. Okay, Hio Treaty, 1884, or known as Adwa Treaty. We call it Adwa Treaty because Hiots, Sir William Hiots, who came from Britain. Adwa, the treaty was signed in the headquarters in the city of Adwa. That time, Emperor Johannes was administering Ethiopia from his capital, Adwa. Was signed between Sir William Hiots, between this person, a British envoy, as I have said, and Johannes at Adwa in Tigray. It ended the Ethio-Egyptian conflict through British diplomatic intervention. Its first three articles include about 7 articles were included within the Hio Treaty or Adwa Treaty, but the first 3. 1, Ethiopia to have a free transport, that means free transit, be it imports or exports, to use Massawa as a free transit, okay? Restoration of occupied regions to Ethiopia, Bogos, mainly Bogos, in what's called today Eritrea. Ethiopia being responsible to facilitate the evacuation of the trapped Egyptian troops. So it was, in general, it was in the advantage of Egypt that Sir William Ewart, on behalf of the British government, meaning Egypt was under Britain, on behalf of the Egyptian government, manipulated by the British actually, he came to discuss the case with Emperor Johannes at Adwa. He arrived in 1884. And I could say, like, it was a trapping how Sir William here trapped or diverted the attention of Emperor Johannes, okay, for the advantage, benefit of Egyptians, but hurting Ethiopia. But that time, Johannes was not conscious of their tactic. So this was not fruitful, free transit. He couldn't get Massawa. Okay, in the end, restoration of occupied regions, he got it, bogus, but uh, after a time, the Italians control it, Ethiopia being responsible. So they proposed these two terms for the advantage of Johannes, but the third one, this one, was for the advantage of Egyptians. And Johannes was forced to make evacuates the trapped Egyptian force. And finally, by the order of Emperor Johannes, Ras Alula, that time the governor of Maramallash, or Eritrea today, he commanded his army and entered this part of the Sudan, bordering Ethiopia. He crossed the border and brought back, evacuated those trapped Egyptian troops this way, and through the Red Sea, they were able to go back to their home, Egypt. Okay, Johannes through Ras Alula effectively succeeded in facilitating the trapped Egyptian troops to go back to their home. Okay, Battle of Kofit, that is it. As I mentioned here, Battle of Kofit, it's called. 1885, on his part, Johannes ordered Ras Alula to rescue the trapped Egyptian army in the Sudan to safely evacuate. Rescue meaning to safely evacuate trapped Egyptian army in the Sudan. Ras Alula accomplished his mission, fighting with the Mahdists at Kofit. However, that's the point. This Ethio-Egyptian alliance provoked a series of Mahdist attacks on northwestern Ethiopian regions. Mahdists had nothing to do with Ethiopia, in particular with Johannes, okay? But the point is, Egyptians stood against the Mahdists, Sudan. They were enemies. Now, when Johannes agreed, okay, and signed the Hewa Treaty for the benefit of the Egyptians, that became the cause for Mahdists to be angered, indignant, and to take action against Emperor Johannes. In general terms, the Hewa Treaty was successful in the restoration of Bogus to Ethiopia, while it failed to give access to, I have mentioned this case. Besides its withdrawal from Bogus and Massawa, Egypt also went out of Tajura, Zeila, Barbara, all of which fell easy to prey to colonial powers. Okay, Tajura went to France, Zeila and Barbara remained in the hands of the British colonizers, and Britain to check and supervise. She wanted one great power from Europe to check the daily movement of the French from their location Tajura, what's called today Djibouti, to the Sudan, and all the way to their area, West Africa, France, okay, he wanted, or not only want, but he invited, the British invited the Italians to come and control Massawa. And they did it in 1884. So Johannes' interest to get control of or to use the port of Massawa became fruitless. Another enemy came. Who were they? The Italians. Now the picture totally changed. Okay, from Egyptian attack, and then to the Mahadist attack, and then to the Italian attack. Johannes just turned one after the other, just defending the country from foreign enemies. Okay, Moscow was taken by the Italians. That was in 1885. Another turning point in Ethiopian history. Okay, bear in mind that's 1839. Britain took Aden, what's called Yemen. That is it. Here is Yemen. Here is Yemen. Britain controlled Yemen or Aden. And later occupied Zayla and Berbera, as I mentioned here, okay, and British Somaliland. 1862, France occupied Bok, Djibouti, and then French Somaliland under France. 1869, Italian Robatino Shipping Company purchased Assab, bought Assab, the land of the natural property of Ethiopia, bought Assab, which was then possessed by the Italian government in 1882. It was a private company, shipping company. Then in 1882, the government of Italy controlled that area, Assab. And gradually from here, Assab is here, in 1882, okay, 3 years later, the British gave the Italians to control the area what's called the port of Massawa. This area became Italian control. Amazing. Ethiopia lost a lot. 1885, as I said, Italy occupied Massawa. It soon blocked the import of arms to Ethiopia. Johannes was blocked from the use of Massawa to import the arms he wanted to have, collected heavy customs duties, and began to expand into the islands of Maramalash in Eritrea, even on Ethiopian. It was a burden. Okay, Italians collected heavy custom duties from Ethiopian merchants who used the port of Massawa, and gradually encroached 40, 50 kilometers from Massawa, then to the mainland, Maramalash, highlands of Maramalash. Earlier it was called Maramalash. Nowadays, this part, it was Maramalash. And nowadays, after a time, since 1890, once Italians control it, they gave it a name called Eritrea. The British policy, was in favor of strengthening Italy in the Red Sea region, which aimed at checking French expansion in the region. I discussed this, I mentioned this case before. However, Johannes requested Queen Victoria, while the British were backing or giving support this Italian adventure, but the British advised him to live in love and peace was the powerful. Amazing what the response given sent to Johannes from Queen Victoria was. He tried to show that the British were backing Italian adventure and to stop that, but rather the Queen Victoria advised to live in peace and love with the Italians. She advised him, and this case leading the two sides, Ethiopia and Italy, to a kind of bloody war, inevitable war. In his last days, Johannes IV was in a kind of triangular tension, meaning in the north, the Italians were continuously expanding after they took control of Massawa towards Eritrea, that means Maremelash. In the west and northwest, the Mahdists were making attacks on Matama and Gondar. These were one way. Just in the north, there were Italians, sorry. In the north, just the problems, triangular tension, what we mean. Here was Johannes in the north against him, the Mahdists from northwest against him, and there was also the case of Minilik and from the center of Ethiopia. Johannes was under tension. Okay, we'll see next time how Ras Alula gave his first blow to the Italians in what was called Dogali. Thank you for now.